On December 8th, in Washington, D.C., in words that have resonated through the years, Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. When Congress overwhelmingly passed the resolution, the United States was at war for the first time in many months. Churchill thought that victory lay within the Allies' grasp and went to bed and slept the sleep of the saved and the thankful. The American military tried to rebound from catastrophe. 8 congressional and military boards concluded that the Pacific Fleet commander, Admiral Kimmel, and Army Commandant Lieutenant General Walter C. Short had been negligent in their duties and they were relieved of their posts. In an effort to raise morale, a Navy message to troops at Pearl Harbor said, "You will have your revenge." Recruiting stations are jammed with men eager to join you. At the same time Japanese aircraft blitzed Pearl Harbor, other Japanese units advanced towards Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and other Pacific islands. In the first of 3 huge military operations, the Japanese army planned to move through Malaya, then split into 2 groups and swing west into Burma and east toward the Dutch East Indies. From Formosa, other units would strike American forces in the Philippines, while the Japanese Navy steamed in the Pacific to seize control of Guam, Wake Island, and the Gilberts. Once they accomplished these moves, the Japanese intended to construct a defensive barrier behind which they could exploit the resources of Asia and the Pacific. By the time the United States recovered sufficiently from Pearl Harbor to mount a counteroffensive, which the Japanese predicted would take at least 18 months, their forces would be so firmly ensconced behind the defensive barrier that they could not be dislodged. On December 9th, Japan quickly took Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands against minor opposition. The next day, 5,400 Japanese attacked the 427 Marine and Navy personnel stationed at Guam, 1,500 miles east of Manila. Although the men battled heroically, they were forced to surrender within 1 day. 5 hours after Pearl Harbor, more than 200 Japanese aircraft approached American military installations in the Philippines. Since news of the Pearl Harbor attack had already flashed around the world, the Japanese aviators expected stiff resistance from American fighters and anti-aircraft guns. In a surprise more astonishing than Pearl Harbor, there was very little. Japanese planes destroyed, American bombers and fighters neatly arranged in rows on the ground. With this second major blow to American forces stationed in the Pacific, MacArthur, the commander of Allied forces in the Philippines, lost much of his air capability. MacArthur now scrambled to assemble a defensive stance to confront the inevitable Japanese land assault. He intended to place most of his men along the southern shore of Lingayen Gulf, fight as long as possible, then withdraw to the south into the Bataan Peninsula and wait for reinforcements from the United States. On December 22nd, a force of 43,000 Japanese soldiers under Lieutenant General Masaru Homma landed at Lingayen Gulf, but farther north than MacArthur expected. Meeting little opposition, the Japanese army raced behind MacArthur's surprised soldiers and began closing in from the rear. At the same time, a second invasion force landed 70 miles south of Manila at Lamon Bay and headed toward the capital. MacArthur had no choice but to order a hasty retreat into the Bataan Peninsula to avoid being trapped by the 2 forces. Barely 20,000 soldiers were healthy enough on Bataan to oppose the Japanese. When Homma renewed his offensive, the Americans and Filipinos could not hold out. After a 5-hour bombardment on April 3rd, fresh Japanese reinforcements, backed by artillery and armor, punched holes in the thin American defensive line. The Americans and Filipinos maintained the line long enough to evacuate 2,000 men and 104 nurses to the island of Corregidor in Manila Bay, but continued resistance was futile. On April 9th, roughly 12,000 American and 63,000 Filipino soldiers on Bataan laid down their arms on orders from Major General Edward P. King, Jr. The Western powers, who only 6 months ago had ruled much of the Far East and the Pacific, were now reduced to the trapped garrison on Corregidor. Japan had triumphed everywhere else and would soon add one more conquest. For 1 month, Japanese artillery bombarded Corregidor around the clock to weaken the defenders for the final attack. During the night of May 5th to 6th, Japanese forces crossed over from Bataan, fought through the minor resistance existing at the beaches, and spread throughout the island. Realizing that the end had come, Major General Jonathan M. Wainwright surrendered his forces. When the Japanese threatened to continue the killing unless Wainwright ordered the surrender of all American troops in the Philippines, not just those on Corregidor. Wainwright issued the directive. He feared that unless he agreed, the Japanese would exact their anger on the wounded and the nurses in Malinta Tunnels Hospital. Some Americans stationed elsewhere in the Philippines complied with Wainwright's order, but many fled into the jungle to continue resisting. Just before the surrender, Army Signal Corps Private Irving Strobing radioed Pearl Harbor, a recording of which was aired 3 weeks later on a radio program. "The jig is up. Everyone is bawling like a baby. They are piling dead and wounded in our tunnel. I know now how a mouse feels. Caught in a trap waiting for guys to come along and finish it up. My name is Irving Strobing. Get this to my mother, Mrs. Minnie Strobing, 605 Barbie Street, Brooklyn, New York. My love to Pa, Joe brother, Sue sister, Mac, Gary, Joy, and Paul." Just before the surrender, Army Signal Corps Private Irving Strobing radioed Pearl Harbor, a recording of which was aired 3 weeks later on a radio program. "The jig is up. Everyone is bawling like a baby. They are piling dead and wounded in our tunnel. I know now how a mouse feels. Caught in a trap waiting for guys to come along and finish it up. My name is Irving Strobing. Get this to my mother, Mrs. Minnie Strobing, 605 Barbie Street, Brooklyn, New York. My love to Pa, Joe brother, Sue sister, Mac, Gary, Joy, and Paul. Tell Joe, wherever he is, go give him hell for us. God bless you and keep you." On May 6th, Wainwright cabled Roosevelt. "With broken heart and head bowed in sadness, but not in shame, I report to your excellency that today I must arrange terms for the surrender of the fortified islands of Manila Bay. With profound regret and with continued pride in my gallant men, I go to meet the Japanese commander. Goodbye, Mr. President." With the collapse of resistance in the Philippines, the Japanese controlled the Pacific from Hawaii to the far east. Only in Australia did the Allies maintain a slim hold. The U.S. Navy had been manhandled at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Army had been forced out of the Philippines, and the U.S. Marines had surrendered at Wake Island and Guam. The British lost much of their fleet as well as their 2 major possessions in the Far East, Singapore and Hong Kong. After 300 years, the Dutch lost the Indies. The only news that energized the American public, the electrifying defenses at Wake Island and Bataan, resulted in additional defeats, just when things seemed their worst. Events in the first week of May 1942 cast a glimmer of hope. The U.S. Navy, aided by radio intelligence, started to turn the tide. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, a Japanese invasion force was turned back from Port Moresby on the island of New Guinea. Weeks later, the epic Battle of Midway would change the balance of power in the Pacific permanently.